Appalachian Mountains, West Virginia, winter 2013. At a bend in a forgotten road where the trees seemed taller than the sky, two boys got out of an old pickup truck with backpacks on their backs and grocery bags in their hands. They were brothers, twins, almost identical. 15 years old, thin, quiet. The driver pointed to the frost-covered trail and said without turning his face, "That won't last 3 nights." They didn't answer. They just kept walking. While the other young people at the shelter waited in line for foster families, they had made the one decision no one expected, to use the remainder of their grandmother's pension to buy, for $50, an old shack hidden at the edge of the woods. Nobody understood. In that part of the Appalachians, sheds like that became iron traps in winter. But the brothers saw something there, something they couldn't even explain in the first few days. When their fingers ached from the cold and the silence was an endless punishment, what was under the concrete wasn't just ice. It was a forgotten secret, and now it was theirs. The nearest town was called Pine Hollow, a village frozen in time, a gas station with a crooked sign, a church that only opened on Sundays, the same woman sweeping the porch every day, and any new face was a warning sign. When Elijah and Noah arrived, nobody asked anything, but everyone stared, and nobody smiled. The first time they appeared in public was at the market. Elijah, who had been born just minutes before, entered with his hands tucked into the sleeves of his thin coat, asking if there was a shovel he could borrow. The owner, a man named Cal, simply looked up and said, "What are you going to dig, kid, in all this ice?" Outside, Noah waited, kicking the snow with his wet sneakers. A man carrying a bag crossed to the other side of the street to avoid passing him. They said nothing, but every gesture around them said it all. The shed was more than 5 kilometers away, and the trail to get there looked like a corridor of frozen roots. In the summer, maybe a tractor could get up it. In the winter, it was like dragging weight through a freezer. On the first day, they brought 2 blankets, some cans, and a bottle of warm water. The door was locked with an old chain. The key came from a yellowed envelope handed over by a social worker who simply said, "Good luck." When they unlocked it, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Inside, the smell of iron and mold, a cracked floor, small windows, but dry, and that was all. Noah huddled close to the metal wall and said softly, "They were right." Elijah didn't answer. He just stood there with his back to the ground, looking at it. The next day, they walked to the city. It took them more than 2 hours. With each step, the snow soaked their shoes. At the hardware store, they asked for tarps, firewood, anything that would block the wind. The salesman didn't even laugh. "You won't last on this mountain. You'd better head back to the city before it swallows you up." They bought a tarp with a hole in it for a few coins. That night, the wind swept through everything. The metal groaned. Elijah woke with his teeth chattering. Noah trembled in the corner, silent, staring at the dark ceiling. On the 3rd day, Elijah went to the only public phone in town and tried to speak to someone in assistance. He said he wanted a job. Anything. A man listening nearby laughed. "Work? At what age? And without an address? What you have is a tin tomb." By the end of the day, the whole city already knew. The boys from the mine coffin. 4th day, the phone rang. He was the county attorney. There was a proposal. "There are people interested in the land. $1,000. They'll pay now." Elijah listened in silence. Noah said nothing, but he stared at the ground as if the cold was already winning. The next day, Elijah took some of the remaining money and bought planks, ropes, and a small hammer. The seller didn't help. He just watched him tie everything to his back. Along the way, a woman stopped and looked at the two of them. "You're too young for this." Elijah simply nodded and continued. That night, they worked in silence. Noah held the planks. Elijah hammered the nails. The sound was the only warmth there. "Why don't we just sell and leave?" Noah asked. Elijah took a while to reply. "Because sometimes when someone leaves something for you, it's to see if you can handle it." 2 days later, another letter. Increased offer, $5,000. It was possible to disappear, to start over. But Elijah was already kneeling on the ground, scraping a straight line that looked different. Hours later, they found a lid, and beneath it, a dark space, a smell of ancient earth, and a chest. Inside, old banknotes wrapped in rubber bands, glass jars, a leather notebook, a letter. "If you found this, it's because you didn't give up." Signed by Thomas Callahan, grandfather of the two, a former mine worker. The notebook explained that there was a spring of pure water beneath the land, a hidden water table. The water rights were tied to the deed. That's why they wanted to buy it. And now it belonged to them. Elijah closed the notebook, his hands trembling. Noah trembled in the corner, eyeing the chest as if it were a trap. The cold persisted. But now, there was a reason to stay. They spent $100. They bought a thermal tarp, used blankets, and a small stove. On the way back, Elijah slipped. He cut his hand. Noah ran to him. He didn't say anything. But that night, he was the one who hammered the blankets onto the walls. On the 8th day, Noah fell ill. Fever, dry cough. The only infirmary in the area was slow to respond. The first question was, "Do you have a house?" Elijah replied, "We have a place to sleep." They returned with a weak antibiotic and a warning. Nights like this kill. In the following days, Elijah stayed awake. He tended the stove. He planned in silence. He marked measurements on the wall. He sketched a way to collect water. "Do you think it's possible to live here?" Noah asked. "I don't know," he replied. "But nobody here expects us to die." Days later, they tested the stove. The ceiling wept from the inside out. For the first time, the shed looked like a shelter. Then the men in ties arrived in a dark Jeep. They offered $20,000. "You are not safe here. We can help you start over." Noah looked at the two of them. "Do you think nobody sees what's behind the dark glass?" They left. But now they knew. The secret had been discovered. The shed was shaking again in the wind. But inside, two boys were hammering nails with their hands still trembling. Not out of weakness, but only through persistence. Because for the first time it was all theirs. And the world. He began to listen in silence. For more than an hour, Elijah walked in silence, his body leaning against the wind, sinking into the snow up to his knees. He followed the faded tracks on the ground as if they were the only thread of reality. Branches scratched his legs. Ice seeped into his shoes. When he arrived at the warehouse, the door was ajar. Inside, total darkness. The stove was out. The air was heavy. Noah was lying near the back wall, half turned over, trembling involuntarily, his lips bluish. The blizzard had blocked the air intake. The makeshift ventilation failed. Gas filled the space. Noah fainted from the cold and dizziness. Then, he simply passed out. Elijah didn't think. He dragged his brother out of the shed, right onto the ice. She covered his face with clean snow. She called out. She gently patted his cheeks. She pressed her trembling hands against his chest. Noah coughed. Low, weak, but I'm alive. They didn't go back inside that night. They spread a tarp between two trees. They lay there, huddled together, huddled up. The cold was a familiar enemy, but it was real, honest, breathable. Elijah kept his brother awake, alternating sips of the remaining warm water. He rubbed his arms incessantly. The next day, they returned to the shed. They didn't say a word. Now every step was a pact. Every nail, a calculated risk. Elijah spent the entire day reviewing everything. He studied old manuals that were in the trunk. He cut pieces of rusted pipe. He installed a safety chimney. He secured it with wire. He sealed the gaps with thick cloths. Noah helped silently, even though his hands were still trembling. 2 days later, a new letter arrived. Now it was $25,000. This time it came with a formal warning. The land would be reported to the county due to structural risk. The term used, blight. On paper it meant damage. In practice I meant obstacle. Elijah went to George's shop. He took his grandfather's notebook. The blueprints, the maps, the letter. George read everything in silence. Finally he stood up slowly. "You have something here, and they know it." He paused. "But now, I know too." The next morning George showed up with an old toolbox and a clipboard. "Let's reinforce this before they try to take it away from you." He asked for nothing in return. The reinforcement started with the foundations. George taught them how to prepare a new base with dry cement, capable of supporting a wood-burning stove they found in a junkyard. Elijah installed the chimney using galvanized pipes. Noah built the bed base using pallet wood. She was still trembling, but it was effort, not fear. "Every night I work. Every morning firewood. 1 correction per day." In the 3rd week, 2 envelopes arrived. One from the city hall, warning that the land was under review for public use. Another one with a new offer, $45,000. It was possible to rent an apartment, far from there, with peace and quiet for at least a year. Noah embraced the role. "They want to know how much our fear is worth." Elijah replied without looking, or how little our calm is worth. The next day, George brought someone. Henrik, retired electrician. Quiet, large hands, tired eyes. He spent almost an hour looking at the makeshift wiring Noah had made from a car battery. In the end, he simply said, "This place is going to catch fire." And it started from scratch. Gradually, others appeared. A gentleman donated some old gutters. A woman brought pots and pans. A couple left bags of expired pet food, which were used to insulate the windows. Nobody talked much, but everyone came back. On Sundays, they served soup at church. The boys started going, not for the food, for the silence. Now, people just nodded their heads. Inside the warehouse, everything changed. A room was created using wooden partitions. The kitchen was separated by a screen made of stretched cloths. A wire connected a yellow light bulb to the ceiling. It was still cold, but it was hot. A week later, Elijah answered the phone. He was the lawyer. "They know about the water." "Who told us?" "It doesn't matter. They'll change their strategy." "For which one?" "Pressure." On Tuesday, the power went out. On Wednesday, the road was closed for construction work. On Friday, an inspector showed up asking for documents that didn't even exist for this type of construction. On Monday, the last letter arrived. 70,000. This time it was Noah who answered, not with words. He took some black paint and wrote on the outside of the shed, "Not for sale." The next day, the phrase appeared in a teenager's story in the city. Legend, "Is this madness or courage?" The following week, new words appeared on the walls, some painted by children, others by neighbors. Stay. To resist is also to build. This is worth more than money. Winter has begun to ease, but not the tension. In April, the city's main well was closed. Nitrate contamination. Ash Hollow went on alert. Businesses closing early, schools suspended, hospitals overwhelmed. For the first time, the city center had less water than the warehouse. George showed up early with an envelope from the county. It was a formal request. The city government wanted emergency access to the aquifer on the property. Nothing grand, just temporary. Elijah stared at the paper for several long seconds. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. The following night, there was a knock at the door. She was the woman who had crossed the street months before to avoid Noah. Now she was holding her daughter's hand, looking down, clothes too thin for the cold. "Is it true that you have clean water here?" Noah nodded. He handed over a gallon, without asking anything. The girl smiled. Nothing was said, but everything was understood. In the following days, discreet visits. Some left something in return. Others simply expressed their gratitude. No one mocked them anymore, not even with a glance. The lawyer called again. Now it was a partnership proposal. Channel some of the water to the city. In exchange, improvements to the warehouse, energy, reinforcements, structure. George was present. Elijah looked at him. "It is worth it?" George nodded slowly. "Now it's worth it, because the value is no longer just theirs. It's yours." The contract was signed the following week. It included a clause written by Elijah. The water supply will be lifelong and symbolic for local residents. Noah wrote below, and the land will never be used for anything other than living. Today, the warehouse is still simple on the outside, but from the inside, it's impossible to remove. 2 bedrooms, kitchen, wood-burning stove, solar panels, bookshelves with stacked books, but it's not the walls that hold it up. It's the decision to stay. Kaio is now studying hydraulics on his own. Elijah records everything in notebooks with blueprints and calculations. They refused interviews. They refused awards. They prefer silence. Because there, in the cold, in the middle of nowhere, 2 rejected boys built something that no amount of money could buy. Respect that doesn't require sound. And if you've ever thought about giving up on a place, maybe it's because you haven't truly settled in yet. If stories like this resonate with you, subscribe to the channel.